It is an honor to be here this evening. Um, I would like to really start by saying someone in the chat mentioned not stating slaves and instead saying enslaved people. And I wrote, it's important. Indeed, I agree, because one, when we talk about enslaved people, we're talking about people who had experiences, a person, versus someone who is dehumanized. And I think as we are moving towards understanding our history, that we really need to take in consideration the experience, the lack of experience, the lack of human experience, but the people were human, right? So as we engage in this conversation tonight, I really want to paint a picture for you. And before I paint this picture, I chose to really delve into this topic of trauma because I am a licensed clinical psychologist, as Monda reported. And I witnessed so many people having similar and common symptomology. And that kind of generated more curiosity of what is going on with our people. Why are they experiencing certain things as it relates to trauma? And I read this book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, which really, if you haven't read it, I'm going to encourage you to read it. That really sparked my interest on intergeneration trauma and really influenced me on how I'm going to continue to serve people who look like me, to actually heal, reclaim their lives, and become empowered. So I want to paint a picture for you tonight. But first, again, I'm going to dedicate this presentation to the millions of African captives who gave their lives, but not their spirits, to the Middle Passage. So I'm honoring them even in the midst of this. So imagine that you were at home, that you were dressed in your cultural clothes, or even you went outside to play with your children or to gather food or bathe or anything like that. Then you were shackled and stripped of your clothes, your jewels, your customs. You even were removed from who you are in terms of your mind, your spirit, and even your culture. You experienced at least 88 days or more on water, okay? Having dehydration, hunger, sleeping in your own feces or any other person's feces, having fear, anger, frustration, witnessing deaths as such as suicide, sickness all around you, being humiliated, betrayed, raped, and even physically abused. But it didn't even stop there, because when you got off the boat or the ship, you were still shackled, scrubbed so hard that your skin was peeled off. You were inappropriately touched, sold, working long hours, even gaining a new name or even a religion. Just imagine that for a moment. This picture illustrates the room that the person had on the vessels. These enslaved people had less room than people in a coffin. Imagine that. Imagine the impact that it had on their psychological mind. So as we begin to have even a deeper conversation of what this looks like, remember, African Americans were captured people rather than conquered people. So as we really think about how we are living in our psyche and all the things, the atrocities that we've gone through in this world, how are we conquered people? How are we resilient people? So as we talk, and I'm hoping that we'll be engaged and having, dialogue with some of the slides that I have, or even afterwards, we can really go into a conversation. So my question to you, can trauma be stored away and remain latent meaning stand still in a collective unconscious of people in a community. What are your thoughts? You can jump right on in. What are your thoughts? Do you think
Charmaine said yes, it can.
it absolutely can? So even as we're talking about what this looks like, ancestral mathematics, think about who you are as an individual. You're born from two parents, and then you have four grandparents, eight grandparents, 16 second great grandparents, 32 third great grandparents, 64. You just read the list, okay? From you, who you are, you're carrying the DNA of all those people. Not only are you carrying the DNA, guess what? You're carrying their struggles, their mental health, their emotionality, because emotions are passed down. Okay, so the stories and all of that, yes, are one thing, but in terms of what happened? In terms of how we are and how we move is very important. I don't know what just happened to my. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Because I don't know, it's something just happened. So
it was the ancestors trying to tell us something. Like
I see. Okay, I'm with it.
They were saying,
they're like, we here, we here.
We give thanks. We give thanks. So understanding the relationship of the past and how it shapes the present is very important to fortify healing. Because when you think about trauma, it affects the whole entire person, the mind, the body, and the spirit. But typically, individuals will have symptoms that always manifest physically, right? We'll see the physical symptoms, but not the emotional or spiritual. So when we talk about intergeneralization trauma, or even trauma in general, the prevalence began in around the 1800s when children were displaying post-traumatic stress behaviors without experiences of trauma themselves. So they didn't even go through the trauma. They were experiencing the trauma-related symptoms. Now, this topic was typically done in a psychoanalytic viewpoint with Holocaust survivors. Now, as we know, that was atrocity to the Jewish individuals, but there were not a lot of information in terms of African Americans and what that looks like. And we are one of the most severe groups that have been dehumanized, been hurt, have experienced so many atrocities. And even in research, there's dearth amount of information, okay? However, when you think about criminality and psychopathology and all those other things, we're on the high list of those things, okay? So as we have an idea of what happens with African Americans and even individuals who are dealing with trauma, around 27% to 71% of individuals who have histories of abuse, they have a lapse in reasoning. So it tells me already that trauma impacts the brain. It impacts how you reason, how you speak, how you perceive things, okay? And all of these experiences not only impact the emotionality, but behaviors, right? So behaviors such as aggression, how you relate to your PTSD, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, absence or organized stress will be impacted, how you deal with conflict. Now, when you think about psychopathology, right, the word means soul suffering. Imagine that. The term means soul suffering. So that already tells us that we need to do something spiritually also in terms of trauma. So again, anyone is impacted, But these ethnic populations, African American, Aboriginal, American Indian, Japanese American, all have experienced atrocities. And we've already spoke about Holocaust survivors, but also military survivors, individuals with IPV, immigrants, and asylum seekers. I'm only speaking about African Americans right now, okay? So when you think about trauma, it is an emotional wound. And when you think about an emotional wound, you can't really see it, right? And you will have a fight, flight, or freeze response, okay? So when you deal with the trauma, you're either going to fight it off, you're going to run, or you're going to sit still, okay? Initially, if the trauma is not resolved, the person has not recovered. They may be triggered, and guess what? They may have survival responses. Okay, we all move from a survival standpoint because it's a primal level in our brain. But how we react sometimes are misunderstood based upon the trauma experiences that we have. Okay, so I'm not pathologizing African American people. My goal is for you all to kind of identify and express what type of traumatic experiences you may have in your life and things that you may think you need to resolve to become a better person. Okay, so how the brain works with trauma, basically, you're going to be untrusting, suspicious. You're going to be negative, pessimistic, have addictive behavior, self-sabotaging, scattered, distracted, unmotivated, drained with energy, self-critical, emotionally cut off, and judgmental to other people. So you're probably saying, well, how will I know these things? It'll impact your interpersonal relationships and even how you see yourself. So Monda kind of showed this clip in the beginning, right? This was in 1863, but look in 2020. There's commonalities there, is it not? Suffering and what that looks like. So in terms of trauma, there's so many different types of trauma, right? We're talking about right here, cultural trauma. And occurs when there's a collective has been subject to unbearable event experiences that undermines their sense of group identity, their values, the meaning and the purpose, and even their cultural world views, okay? Now, historical trauma, on the other hand, is mass trauma that is deliberate and systemically inflicted upon a target population by controlling a dominant group. It's not limited to a single catastrophic event, and it continues over time, okay? Even with traumatic events, it kind of reverberates throughout the population, creating a universal experience of trauma. The magnitude of the trauma experiences derails the whole population and has a legacy of physical, psychological, social, and economic disparities. So when you think about trauma, when you think about PTSD, it's about one event. But when you talk about individuals of African American descent, they've experienced complex trauma because these are traumas that continue over time. All trauma is historical, okay? But if you really think about how it rocks and shakes our brains, it stunts our mind, it freezes our body, and it definitely changes the perceptions that we have of people and of ourselves, okay? So are there any questions so far?
No questions.
I have a question, Dr. Sonya. Hi, it's Allison. Um, I hear what you're saying about the historical trauma and what it does to the brain. And I guess I'm thinking, how do we survive anyway? And people, how are we able to rise above with all this trauma in our DNA?
Mm-hmm. Good question. How we rise from it? One, many of us are on a survival mode all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right? And so that survival mode keeps us, but that survival mode is on a primal level. in our brain. Okay, so when you think about the brain, right, it has so many areas: the amygdala, the frontal lobe, the limbic system, all those areas, and they're all impacted. But the primal brain is in the cerebellum, right, and it really focuses on that reflexive, instinctual type of thing, right? So that's how we keep going, because we're always surviving. What matters right now, how we get through. But when you go through post-traumatic growth, that's when you really start processing and putting things together, integrating them. Hopefully that you're able to change your perception, identifying emotions. There are over 400 emotions. Typically, people only experience 10 to 15. Okay? That's serious. But as we keep going and talk about it, we'll kind of identify other ways in which we can grow from it. Does that make sense, Miss Allison?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So when you think about historical trauma and even controlling, it requires the overwhelming feelings of violence, segregation, displacement, economic deprivation, and even cultural disposition. So that means it takes away who we are as people. Okay. Historical trauma includes those microaggressions that Monda spoke about earlier, right? And when you even think about trauma as well, there's vicarious trauma. That's when you see, hear it, right? And that changes your cognitive state. So there are so many different areas of trauma that we deal with on a regular basis, okay? But in terms of intergeneralization trauma, it's things that's cumulative over the past and present day, and it produces and reproduces communal suffering. So the transmission of trauma, it goes from generation to generation, okay? It's often racialized, colonized, and socially, economically impactful, okay? So I often think about, when you're thinking of interpersonal trauma, you think about individuals who parents have anxiety, right? It's also part of predisposition. In the psychological world, we call it predisposition. Many times individuals who parents have major depression, anxiety, substance use disorder, first degree relatives tend to also have those types of disorders too. But when you think about intergeneralization trauma, the residue of enslaved people are passed down. So your personality, your dysfunctional attitudes, shaming, being silent, habits, turning the other cheek type of thing, those stereotypical behaviors, being a strong Black woman, a mammy, stereotypes, no eye contact, all those things are being translated and transformed back to us, okay? Victimization, branding, castration, mutilization, stabbing, all those things impact us. So when we think about how do we get through it, there's several things that we have to pay attention to. Because one, when you think about intergeneralization trauma, it's about the lack of safety, the lack of trust, overwhelming fear, feeling powerless, the loss of control, okay? And the ability to have the sense of independence, but the inability to have the autonomy, okay? So there's a continuum of resistance and resilience, okay? And we try to strive for resilience, but sometimes there's resistance, because sometimes we have a system that won't allow us to do the things that we need to do. So it impacts families in so many different ways, such as unresolved emotions, negative repeated behaviors, untreated or poorly treated substance use, mental illness, poor parent-child relationships, emotional attachment, complicated personality or personality disorders. Not only that, it destructs the communication dyad between two people. You think about your relationships. How do you communicate with your partner? How are you the object of the relationships? How do you see it? Is it equal? Is it not? All these things have a social context to it in terms to psychological backgrounds, okay? So as we move forward, as Monda spoke about the pathways, slavery, Jim Crow, housing, ghettos, welfare, mass incarceration, racial profiling, police brutality, all those things impact us as a community, intergenerationally, okay? And as we move forward, having an understanding of epigenetics is very important, because in studies it's shown that from your gene makeup, if your family, someone in your family have experienced trauma, the DNA changes, okay? It shifts. The epigenetics is really about the inheritance of passing things down. So the DNA shifts into or modifies without really changing the code itself. Okay, so there are chemical tags that typically happen. And we think about this from a physical standpoint, but I'm saying emotionally it's happening. Because when you think about emotions, emotions are passed down from generation to generation. We already spoke about predisposition, right? But just as your eye color, your height, and everything else, your emotionality are too. So trauma can be transferred via repeated environment, triggering from reformation or any other gene generation in terms of imprinting, okay? And it's been studies related to mice pups and olfactory palms, if any science majors out here. At one point, scientists had did similar studies to the Pavlov situations with a shock of the mice. So what happened, they shocked the male mice a couple of times and they gave them a cherry bomb. And every time they shocked them, they gave them a cherry bomb. And then after they copulated, after they mated, and the mother gave birth to the mice, what happened when the cherry bomb was presented to the offspring, the offspring began to have the similar symptoms of PTSD, shaking, trembling, and all those types of things. Okay, that's in my studies. So a lot of this epigenetics done in animal studies. Same thing with Holocaust survivors and children. They were able to take blood tests, and some of the blood sampling and some of the phenotypes of the blood shown that many of the children whose parents had PTSD had certain areas in the RHN that were lower or higher. So it's already out there that is happening, that is being transformed and transferred. We just need to become more aware of it so we can do something within our families. So again, this is just a pathway of how it shows up in our environment. So the genes, the RNA, proteins, all those things, even trauma, all those things are cross-related. It makes you either vulnerable or resilient, okay? And if you want this PowerPoint, I'll share with Monda, and she could pass along to some of you who are more interested in the topic. But when you think about trauma responses, you'll have depression, anxiety, guilt, hostility, bereavement, grief, emotional numbing, shame, anger, helplessness, powerlessness, feelings of inferiority, even invisibility syndrome, how you may feel like you're always invisible in a certain situation. And sometimes you have to speak out because you are the only one. And maybe sometimes you feel like you can't speak out because you're not seen, okay? So it affects the major role in psychopathology. It affects your memory, your affect regulation, your biological stress, even your interpersonal relatedness, how you are interacting with people. Okay, so even with the invisibility syndrome, it's really focusing on your evaluation of yourself and adaptive behavior. So these social issues that tend to take place, your mental health, substance abuse, physical health problems, isolation, alienation, parenting issues, unemployment, criminality, gang violence, poverty, adverse childhood experiences, all impacted by trauma. The universal goal of anyone is to feel safety. So not just safety, but also having comfort, sometimes a sense of belonging with people, identifying your own worth, your connection with people. But with trauma, it impacts all of that. You're at higher risk for diabetes, infection, um, interpersonal conflict, all those things. Okay. So we talked about what it all happens and how it impacts your life. Now, how are we going to heal? Okay. We must develop appropriate healing methodologies for our people. If we have to take into account social, cultural, and historical influences from an individual, a family, and community's perspective. So individually, you got to do your work. You got to be able to explore and identify your emotionality. You may have to go to therapy beyond the scope of your pastor, your hairdresser, your friend. From a family perspective, you may have to embark upon those family secrets and let those things go and heal and identify trends and triggers and all those things that have been seen in your family and no one has spoken about. Community, we have to uplift each other. Each one teach one. We have to support each other and not give each other setback or a comeback. When you see something happening, we have to do something. You see trauma happening, you see trauma triggers, we have to accept and help individuals. Not only that, from a community standpoint, we have to do some healing from a cultural perspective. So what does that look like? I'm talking about go back to where we come from. Traditional practices, drumming, singing, rituals that we know have healed our people. Herbs, watching your diet, all those types of things are going to be very important for our healing and treatment. So as far as post-traumatic growth, what that means is having a positive psychological change, okay, based upon adversities that you've had. So those changes going to help fortify a greater and higher sense of self and your level of functioning. So from personal strength standpoint, you're really going to identify who you are as a person. The good, bad, and the indifferent. You're going to rethink about yourself, about the world, the future. You're going to come in contact with your emotional regulation, like managing your negative emotions, what that looks like. Okay? What are your negative emotions? How do you present yourself? Reflect upon your challenges as well as your successes. You're going to relate to other people because we're more common than we are different. You're going to have a greater appreciation of life. You're going to try to have new possibilities in life, like taking steps, taking risks to be better, to do better. And most importantly, that spiritual growth. You're going to connect because we are spiritual people. Okay. So if you really think about it, African Americans in spirituality are more spiritual than any racial group. 76% report engaging in prayer at least once per day. At least 53% attend some weekly religious service. Now, there's a difference between religiosity and spirituality, and that's a long conversation. But what I'm saying is that we are connected. We are people that are connected spiritually. And that being said, that can help us adjust, become more in tune to heal and really develop some better sense of our traumas and even our microaggressions daily. We have to first attempt to seek counseling that beyond the scope of the church. The church is wonderful, but we have to go beyond that. We have to seek therapists outside of the church. We are here ready to support and guide you through the process. So a couple of things I want you to remember before questions are asked and things of that nature. One, you have to acknowledge, you have to accept and become empowered of your trauma. You have to stand firm. You have to understand what it is. If you experience some trauma, you should seek professional services. You can heal, lastly. Healing takes place not only in your mind, but your body and your spirit. Now, are there any questions for me? Any questions?
Yeah, Dr. Sonya.
Yes.
Um, you talked about, I think one of the things that struck me that was most fascinated with is how the DNA changes according to the trauma. So there's this guy named Vishen Lakhiani. He wrote a book about bending reality with your mind, having such a powerful um, have such confidence and a powerful take on things that you can actually change reality by tapping into your subconscious and bending it. So my question to you is that if we recognize the intergenerational trauma that we're experiencing, and we know that to be as a result of DNA that's been passed down and emotions that have been passed down, can we then, and I don't know how long it would take, if it's us or the generation after us, but can we change the DNA by healing from the trauma to get, to basically get rid of that? Is it
Absolutely.
through so many generations? Is that possible, and how?
Absolutely. So when you think about your brain, it's expandable. Every time you experience a traumatic experience, your brain kind of rewires. What fires together stays together, right? That's a term we use in the psychological world. But when that happens, you can rechange that, refortify that by communicating with a professional, a trained professional in trauma, formed in care, that they could recharge that and you can start healing with your words, with your narrative, with what's happening to you. And then you'll do alternative things such as what the book indicated, mindfulness, meditation, all those things to kind of ground you. Because when you talk about trauma, your body responds to it. You become hyper alert. You become, you may have panic symptoms, right? You may become fidgety. So all those things are going to train you to kind of calm yourself down. And by doing that, you're rewiring your brain, right? So even if you're having a child, your brain from the mother who's pregnant going through this, during that process, they won't change the DNA or they'll modify the DNA of the child by doing those exercises so it won't be passed down. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to do the work. Once you identify that this has happened, it is your privilege. I'm going to say that again. It is your privilege to heal. It's your right to heal. You no longer have to suffer. It is your right. And once it's your right, you can do and be all that you can be. Just imagine how much trauma has impacted us, embedded us, not being our greatest and higher self.
So, thank you, Dr. Sonya. And before we take our next question, and then I definitely want to hear from Sora Margaret, you shared a story with us in another event with Wings for Joy at our annual meeting, and I thought it was so fascinating. And so, I would, if you don't mind, I'd like you to share it with our audience tonight, and then talk about maybe once your grandmother did finally open up, how that impacted you, and perhaps change your trajectory.
Oh, well, I've had a history of a grandmother that had been, she shared that she had been sexually assaulted. She didn't share that with us until later in life. But when she shared that, it was difficult because she had, kept that internally for years without saying anything. And it impacted us in so many ways, how we actually see ourselves, how we see men, our interactions with people. And it was one time we were at a location, and my mother, my daughter, and I, we all smelled something. We all had a different reaction to it, but we didn't know what it was until my grandmother actually said, this is something that triggered me from that experience. And we all had a similar reaction. So, with that being said, we kind of, in my mind, because I'm a psychologist, I started to really think and pause and say, wow, this is deep. It impacted, and this is before I even delve into really the research that I'm into now. See, and that's how I believe that everything happens for a reason. Everything. It puts you on a path of awareness. Okay. And that experience in itself helped fortify me in trying to do better and being better and educating people on this topic. So imagine what your people have gone through and what it impacted and how it impacted you, even to this day, in your interactions with people. Maybe you don't trust people, women, interacting with women. Is it competition? Are you able to be in a relationship with men or a woman and trust them? Are you able to be vulnerable with people? A lot of us don't feel comfortable being vulnerable in relationships. So, all those things are impactful. And that's why therapy would be beneficial. Okay. I'm team therapy all the way, right? Because I see it. I've worked with so many people. I've been in the field for over 25 years. And I have to say, knock on wood, that individuals who work with me, they do well. I can actually see their lives become changed, empowered, and they are able to reclaim who they are to be more than who they are. So I'm challenging each one of you. If that is an issue with you, a trauma, acknowledge it. That's the first thing. Acknowledge. Then the next thing, accept. And then get the help that you need. Because it's time for our communities to heal. It is time. We have suffered too much. Imagine if we all healed.
Mm.
It'll be a powerful thing. So there's some books that I want you to read. Okay. Medical apartheid is one. Excuse me. My grandmother's hands. I think Monda. Oh, thank you.
You have to. A couple of them I didn't get. So
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So the Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health, phenomenal book. Medical Apartheid is another. My Grandmother's Hands, great book. Real Talk, Black Pain. It just looks like we're not hurting. That's a great book. And it didn't start with you. Okay. So I want you all to begin the journey of healing, because once we heal, our job is to heal other people. And it's time to heal our community. Ashe?
I say, thank you. Rhonda, how are we doing with the questions? Rhonda.
Yes, hi. Here I am. Yes, Monique Joseph mentioned, how do we find clinicians that understand this concept of intergenerational trauma?
Well, just like you're doing research with your partner, well, I shouldn't say your partners, you're doing research, but you want some background information about your partners, you need background information with your therapist. You need to find the information. Do they have trauma history training? Are they informed trauma specialists? Right? Many out here. You can look on the Association of Black Psychologists nationwide. There are psychologists around. There are licensed practicing counselors. There are social workers. Check their background. Okay. In addition, I know people say, I can't afford therapy. I can't afford therapy. Couple of things. Each state has a pro bono service. In the state of Maryland, it's in Townsend, but they cover the whole entire state of Maryland. I am a pro bono therapist. It is our due diligence as a psychologist to provide pro bono services. Not only that, some of your insurances will provide mental health. Okay. If you can't, also, if it's a true therapist, they will also identify a sliding fee scale. So you have to identify what type of therapist you're interested in having, and then the universe will provide the one right for you. Trust me, it happens.
Thank you. And so, Sora Margaret, I think when we look at your DNA, it might be one of resilience.
I
Uh,
should.
with, with your storied history. So, if you don't mind telling the people on the Zoom call who you are and the historical march that took place, which was just the beginning of a lifetime of marches for cause and for community, we'd love to hear your story.
Well, thank you so much. But first, I'd like to say thanks to Dr. Clyburn. In such a short time, you gave us such a wealth of information. And I look forward to reading some of the books that you've listed. I have a whole stack already that I'm waiting for Christmas. In fact, once a couple that Monda has so kindly given to me. So I'm looking forward to not being confined during this Christmas holiday season, but to being involved and going to places through books. So thanks again, Dr. Clyburn. And a correction, I did not march the entire way from Selma to Montgomery, but I was a part of that march. That march was not the beginning of my activism. My activism really started at the young age of 8 years of age, although I didn't call it an activist at that time. It was the end of the 3rd grade year of my school. And I had slipped from Miss Larry's class, walked across the street to where I live. And my mother was surprised because she knew it wasn't the end of the school day. And when I told her that I didn't want to be left at home because I thought 2 of my older sisters were going to the Memphis Zoo, for the first time in my life, I heard about Jim Crow laws. For the first time in my life, I knew that the color of my skin somehow made me different and supposedly less than somebody with white skin. My mother told me that it was a myth that white people were superior, that I was as good as anybody else. I might not be better than anybody else, but I was good as anybody else. And we had a lengthy talk, but it took a number of decades for me to fully unpack what she told me that day. With age comes wisdom, And through the years, I have internalized that lesson my mother gave me at the age of 8. And that's why I say I became an activist, because I knew then that something was wrong with the world in which I lived in segregated Memphis, Tennessee. Something was truly wrong, and I was going to do everything I could to change that. And so the march happened in 1965. I graduated from college in 1957, at the time when the major, well, maybe perhaps not major, but when another period of civil rights activists was so prominent. It was during the time with the murder of Emmett Till. It was during the time of Rosa Parks and the bus sit-in. And I became aware, more fully aware, of what a Black person had to go through, not just during the time when I was living, but I looked back through my mother's time, who grew up during Jim Crow laws, my father's time, my grandmother's time. Dr. Clyburn mentioned the generations that we go through. I happen to be a genealogist and have been for the past 35 plus years. So in the back of my head, I can tell you who they were, what they were, how they came to be. And I'm lucky because for one part of my family, the 1935 subject at Lemoyne College by one of my great aunts told the class to write about their family history. We didn't know about it in 1935. I was not born at that point, but we didn't find that record, that handwritten record, until 1977. And can you imagine the joy when it was found in my aunt's trunk after the last of that family had died, and she had accumulated information from her sisters and brothers. And when I got that, it's 17 handwritten pages, 8.5 by 14. The amazing stories told in that 1935 essay. If you had seen me at my house, you would have thought I had gone crazy. I was jumping with joy. I was so happy. I was beside myself. Later, of course, the Ancestry.com became a common part of my life. And so with those two things together, you can ask me anything about my family on my father's side, my mother's side, and I can tell you everything going back to the early 1800s. But that's beside the point. So Monda knows, don't get me started talking. I probably have changed this topic. But back to the activism. In the 60s, a traumatic time in American history. It was a time of the church bombings. It was a time of Medgar Evers' assassination. It was a time of the March on Washington, 1963. It led to the Birmingham bombings, that was also 63. George Wallace standing in the doorway. The whole issue. I can recall so much of that from personal experiences in terms of reading about it, being a part of it, not just in Memphis, but in Chicago, keeping up with it. Because another thing, I'm a history major. I taught history. So it was my job to be informed and to keep up with what was going on. In 1965, in mid-February, when Dr. Martin Luther King started the first march from the Selma to Montgomery and was deterred, that was the time that Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed. Then they tried again in early March. They were unable. That was when eventually it became known as Bloody Sunday. And it was probably at Bloody Sunday, when you talk about trauma, when you talk about Black trauma, I can't imagine anything more traumatic at that particular time in my life than that 1965 Bloody Sunday march. I was sitting in my home in Chicago, and I could not believe what I was seeing with my own eyes. And I remember turning to my husband and said, I'm going to put my life on the line, because if we don't do it, who will? And that's what led me to become a part of that march. There was some trepidation on the part of me when I finally did arrive the early morning of the last day of that march. But it ended with complete euphoria. It was so wonderful being in that crowd, all of those people whose thoughts and actions and desires equal what I was going through, this feeling of exhilaration that we had finally, we had overcome. Finally, we had done something that was going to benefit not just Black America, but all of America. Because when all of us can do what everybody can do, then we can be a more effective nation. We can perfect the union. And so that was the beginning. At the age of 8, by this time, I'm, of course, a married woman, but that particular march gave me the fortitude that you just can't stop here. So every time you can do something to affect a change in something, do it. Moving to Washington, D.C. in the mid-70s put me closer to the action where I could be physically present at many of the marches. And initially, just like the march from Selma to Montgomery march, I was marching for Black people's rights to vote. In the past 4 years, that has no longer been my priority. My priority has been to defend the integrity of the institutions that define our democracy, because I saw them shattering. These were the same institutions that had labeled me as less than. And yet I knew that until we could fortify those institutions, until we could preserve their integrity, all of us were lost. And so my recent years and being involved in activities, in marches, was because of the failure of our leaders to come forward and provide a foundation that could withstand somebody like Donald Trump, which leads us to these last few months of confinement and in a sense, not confinement, because we are, as Dr. Clyburn said, we can control our own destiny. You don't have to feel locked up simply because you can't do what you have always done. But just take this time to reflect and go back to those old remedies and do the drumming, do the singing, do the involvement, just like we're doing now on Zoom. We don't feel lonesome now, do we? We're together. And in fact, notice the colors that Sonya, Monda, and I are wearing just by accident. But they didn't call me to say, Margaret, we're wearing purple. But here we are, because great minds think alike, right? You guys are not wearing purple, but you fit into our patterns, because I know, because you're a part of this group, a part of this conversation, you too, like the rest of us, want something more than what we have been through. And we're striving for that something more, not just for ourselves personally, but for all of us collectively. And I believe that, well, Sankofa, right? It's that symbolic bird with his feet planted firmly ahead, but with his head turned, taking an egg. And that egg represents the future.
That's right.
And I can see the future. I saw the future and the past collectively together. When I saw John Lewis standing on Black Lives Matter on 16th Street, on the plaza, and in my mind's eye, I saw him giving his baton of fighting for justice to this group of young people, Black and white, more whites than I had ever witnessed in any march I had ever participated in. I saw in my mind's eye, he was passing that baton. Okay, I've done what I could do. I have fought the good life. I have almost died in order to do this. Now it's your time to do it. And they graciously or accepting it because they continue to march. They continue to be on the street fighting for justice for everybody, even during the coronavirus health scare. And it's still there, and they're still going strong. And I think we're all going strong. And the other person I want to mention, because it gives me so much hope that grows out of this, is might sound horrible to say that it gives me hope, because I'm talking about the crucifixion of George Floyd. It was something about those almost 9 minutes of trauma that we all felt. And for the first time, because people were confined to their homes, so many white people saw it, and they internalized it to a degree that Blacks had always internalized this hurt, this trauma that we have lived through for 4 centuries now in the United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that crucifixion, I believe that has given me more hope that more people have come to the rescue of the Black person, so that something is going to be changed. Something is already changing. And I have so much hope for the future. I've seen that egg by that symbol, Sankofa, and I'm bringing it forth with a lot of hope for young people, like those of you I see in this audience. I'm almost 85. You guys are babies. In fact, my daughter is older than all of you here. So I'm looking for you to carry on, because we can do it. All of us can do it. And well, I leave it to you. I know I'm in good hands. I know the world is in good hands. I know the US is in good hands. You got a lot on your plate, and you got a lot to take care of. But thank you for being here. And I'm looking forward to a 2020, what I call TWNTY, TWNTYWON, 2021, because we've done it. Okay. but yes. But so thank you, Monda, for asking me to be a part of this wonderful group today. I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. There's just so much growth in one session. I don't know if I can take it. This is awesome. It's fantastic. And I know there are a few more questions out there. So thank you, Sora Margaret. Thank you, Dr. Sonya. Rhonda, what do we have? We've got about 10 minutes left.
Can I just say something? I think it's and thank you, Mama Morrison, for sharing, because part of the process, we have to listen to our elders. We have to take in their historical accounts. We can learn from them as they can learn from us. So I'm very honored to be here with Mama Morrison as she shared. So it's very important that we collectively embrace our elders so we can learn, because they are very resilient, and we can learn from them so we can move forward.
Thank you.
Amen.
And thanks for the comments I see also. Thank you. May I make one other statement? I'm just thinking about it on the top of my head when somebody just called me Mom Morrison, and I'm thinking that when I first knew that my name wasn't really my name was not when I was 8. It's probably when I was more of a teenager. But I never knew why I was Johnson. That was my maiden name, until I found that record that my great aunt had written in 1935. And she explains in that both of her parents were enslaved people, Spencer Johnson and Caroline Olivia Kate Alley. Caroline was the product of the rape of the slave owner with her mother, Edna. Spencer had 4 brothers, but 3 of them were alive at the end of the Civil War. So when the Civil War ended, this paper that Aunt Evelyn wrote stated that they had been enslaved under 3 families, the Montagues, the Thorntons, and the Johnsons. When the Civil War ended, it was the Montagues who owned them. They had no clue as to who they were in terms of their African heritage and names, So they got together, these three brothers, and decided they would take the name Johnson because that family of the three had been less brutal to that family than anybody else. And we didn't know this until 1977, how we got the name Johnson. We knew it wasn't African, but it gave me, we'll never know our name because my name, your names are probably lost in antiquity. But my parents told me, well, you may never know your name, but you will always know who you are. And so as I walk through life, I take my parents' words and have internalized that. I have always known who I was. And I want that to be a part of how you raise your children and your grandchildren, knowing who they are. A name is nothing. It's what you take as your own personal determination to be the person you know you can be. That's who you are. So now Monda knows I can talk forever, but
Ooh.
I'll leave it at that.
Mama, you talking about character now. You know, it's really about who you are and how you show up, your character.
True.
And I think that's important too. We're representing ourselves, but also our family line, our bloodline, and all that comes with it. So I think you're absolutely right. Thank you for those jewels.
Yeah, it's that character that can overcome this trauma, right?
Yes,
So-
indeed. Don't allow that ego to get you stuck.
Questions, Rhonda? Anyone?
Yes, we have Vanessa, Georgia, and she asked, she's been wondering if anyone has studied intergenerational trauma amongst Black people in the Caribbean, particularly in the smaller islands that never liberated themselves. She's wondering if these effects of trauma are more pervasive in these communities and culture because they've been more isolated throughout the generations.
I'm not familiar with research being done in the Caribbean. So I'm not familiar with it. And I've been researching for a minute. So no, I haven't seen. But that doesn't mean it can't happen. We need some scholars out here. So if any of you all are interested in studying, it's important.
I will put in the chat information for why am I drawing a blank? Information for race relations teachings that I've been following, some workshops I participated in from a sister from the Caribbean who actually has a lot of information about the generational trauma. And she does teach on, that's where I first heard epigenetics. So
nice.
she actually teaches on that. I'm gonna pull her information and I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you.
Spring, Connie said Milagros. Does that make sense?
Yes, Milagros Phillips. Yeah,
I've heard of her. I didn't know she was.
She's from the Caribbean.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, and she actually, a lot of people when they you almost have to hear her talk and then you can hear it. but she's from, and she's got lots of information about that. And so I'll just post her website here in the chat if people want to check out. She's written a couple of different books about just race literacy, but the sessions that I attended was actually her teaching about the trauma, teaching about trauma. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So.
Okay, thank you, Spring. Now, you know, the women, we have been chatty and just sharing all kinds of love, but Andre, you know, some of the fellas that are on the line, there is something to be said about you know, the Black male and what the trauma is just out of this world, what you've been through and what you continue to go through. So do you have any comments for Sora Margaret or Dr. Clyburn or just any of us about how you've been dealing with this year, how you've been dealing with, you know, having the, you know, being a man and being a protector and always having to be on alert, you know, we love to hear from you.
Unmute yourself.
Yeah, I know. I've been on so many Zooms today. Oh my goodness. But when I
Introduce
saw
yourself,
Dr.
please.
Clyburn, my wife and I was like, we got to get on and hear the sister knock it down, or hold it up rather. So family is so important. I'm the son of Clarence Turner. I'm the son of Mary Turner. I'm the grandson of Grandma Rosa Johnson James. I'm the grandson of Curtis Turner. I'm the great grandson of great grandma Mariah Johnson. And I appreciate when can I call you Dr. Morrison, please? When Dr. Morrison said, it's not about, she said so many things, but she said it's not about the name, it's who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And healing is a process that I've been engaging in for some time, and beginning the process of reclaiming my African self. And I also love the way that you framed the Sankofa bird, speaking specifically about that egg.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been aware of the bird flying forward, looking back, and aware of the egg. But what came to me when you were speaking is the creativity that we have to create our future.
Mhm.
And I'll just say healing and post-traumatic growth is a very important conversation, and healing-centered engagement. One, for men to be able to engage in healthy masculine expression,
Mm-hmm.
um, and being in a space with feminine energy, being able to soak that up, embrace it, be able to go inside myself and scan and see the value of the duality of masculine and feminine energy, and share that as a contribution out in the world, because nurturing is protection.
Mhm.
And protection is also protection. And healing, just the continuous conversation around healing and listening and learning. So, Ms. Webb, I don't even know if I answered your question. I didn't even know you was gonna say my name.
I'll tell them ancestors are active today. I didn't know it either.
Yeah. And I'll say this, I'm 51. For 18 years, for 17 years, I hated being dark skinned. I hated being and living in my skin. So when you talk about that trauma, and the greatest thing that could have ever happened to me, aside from understanding my genetic umbilical lineage,
Mm-hmm.
was understanding my African self,
Mhm.
discovering my African self, and beginning to learn about that, to understand the skin that I'm in and the gift in the body that I'm inhabiting, and the culture and lineage that comes with it. So healing has just been an ongoing process to shake off, most of the social challenges that say other than, and knowing and understanding, as Ms. Morrison was saying, knowing who I am and being self-determined to contribute and express that in the world, say otherwise. But I'm just happy to just be in the space, and I appreciate, I done got some book titles as well, and appreciate all of the sharing.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking up. Appreciate it.
Monda,
Yep,
can I
ma'am.
make one other statement?
Of
And
course.
talking about books that I always go back to, no matter what the subject is, because I can always learn something anew each time I read it. And that's W.E.B. Du Bois. Please read him. And you won't understand him the first time or the second time or the third time. I don't know how many times I've picked it up. And each time there's a different flavor to the same words that he's used, but maybe because as I grow older, I can add more into the words I see on the page. But read him. And the same with James Baldwin.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing that man hasn't written that resonates with a person. If you're a human being, it resonates with you. And I'm thinking particularly of My Dungeon Shook and My Chains Fell Off. That was a letter he wrote to his young nephew. And when Andre was talking, it reminded me of the lessons in that letter he wrote to his young nephew about being Black, about being persecuted because of his color, of his parents' color. And he ends up saying something like, "You come from a long line of kings. Remember that." And so I encourage that that letter is a part of, and the fire next time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first, a very short letter compared to a book, but it's just so illuminating. And this was, he wrote it 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. He was writing this in 1963 from the 1863 Abraham Lincoln's. And it hasn't changed. Somebody could write it yesterday, and the words he used are still what we are facing. And you talk about Blackness, that trauma, because of the word Black, has been ingrown in our children for 400 years. And it's going to take 1,000 Dr. Clyburns to erase that mythology, that somehow being Black is less than. Being Black should be the most proudest thing you have, because we come from Africa, where all of the treasures in the world are found, the gold, the diamond, you name it. The wealth of that continent, the mother of that continent, we are all derived from that continent. Stand up and be proud. I have a sister who looks almost, well, she's very light-skinned. She hates being that color. She wants to be Black because of the richness of it, because of the beauty of it, because of the history of it. The historicity of Africa, nobody can touch it. And don't ever let somebody tell you otherwise, Andre. And so when you talk with your children and your grandchildren, no matter how Black they are or how white they are, if they are African American, they are truly, truly something to behold. So keep that into your heart and keep it in your heads.
All right. Well, we're at 8:34. We can probably go just a few more minutes. I appreciate you all for hanging on, but I mean, this has been an absolute treat. My soul has been lifted as a result of this Zoom. So I thank each and every one of you. Are there any more comments? Charmaine, you've been very active on the chat. And, I don't know who you are. I would love to meet you. If you want to talk about why you said, say enslaved people as opposed to slaves, that would be great. And if you don't want to come on camera, that's okay too. But we try to encourage everyone to share.
I'm actually Andre's wife.
Good match. Good
um, no, the only comment, just definitely in the interest of time, is really just to say thank you. I appreciate the lecture, and the conversation, the discussion, and the dialogue. Being able to, or having the opportunity to listen to Mama Margaret and her stories and that history was just beautiful. I had an opportunity to visit Selma this year as part of the recreation of the walk on the bridge, and it was very moving and very powerful, and really just appreciate the history of African Americans here in this country, and the sacrifices that were made. And I don't want to belabor, but the question that I had around healing is kind of like, what does that look like from a practical perspective on a daily basis? Like, when we're in communication with our family members, even for myself. So, I'm going to take family away. I'm gonna stick with Charmaine, right? And what does that look like daily, absent of having a connection to a therapist? What does those rituals look like on a daily basis to help, with that introspective work, to be able to heal, knowing and understanding that intergenerational trauma, and the generational trauma, right? Both. And I am aware of some of the trauma that has existed in my maternal bloodline with my family. But how do you heal it, and how do get to the point of breaking the cycle? Because you have my grandmother and my mother in that relationship, and my mother and me in that relationship, and then me and my daughter in that relationship, and then it just goes on, right? And it continues. And how do you break that cycle, knowing that part of what's happening and what's going on is that generational trauma that has been passed down. And what I would say was really powerful for me to know and understand, when I got the distinction that we talk about that egg and carrying, that Sankofa. But when I got the distinction that, as a woman, if I got pregnant today with a daughter, everything that I'm experiencing and all of that generational, not only is my daughter, but it's her children, because she's born with those eggs, right? And so I'm actually carrying my grandchild
That's right.
when I get pregnant.
That's
And
right.
so I'm already 2 generations behind, so to speak,
Mhm.
just with just being pregnant with my child and my grandchild. And how do you even catch up when you're already behind from day one?
Mhm.
Right? In terms of generations of that trauma being passed down. And I've read Dr. Or Mariba Ani's work around epigenetics, that's been really good and powerful in me understanding a lot of this. But understanding it, and it's like healing is work.
It is.
It's hard work, and it is consistent work, and it's constant, and it's, and I could go on. It's 8:39. And so really that was, kind of the question. And because those it has to stop somewhere. And I'm not just talking about me. I speak for the families that I work with, the
Mhm.
families and the communities, my neighbors, and everyone. So I'll stop there, Mama Webb.
Yeah, I think one of the things, sister, that is important to notice and to take into consideration is that healing is continuous. It's going to be an ongoing thing, as you stated. But one thing that I do as far as ritualistically in the morning, one, wake up, you have to be grateful. You have to be prayerful. You have to speak into existence what you want, even in the water in which you drink. There has to be some spiritual practice, right? In terms of your healing, you have to be intentional in terms of who you are and whose you are, right? And bringing into account what is happening in your life. So if there are conversations that need to be had within the family dynamic, it should happen. You should know your strengths, your weaknesses. Then you have to put forth an effort to say, "Oh, you know what? We can't do it by ourselves. We may need some assistance." And we have to put away the stigma of not, I believe someone actually said it in the chat, that we have to take away the stigma of not seeing a mental health specialist. It's okay. It is safe. The point of the matter of healing is to feel safe again. So how are you going to feel safe? Who are the people that you're going to feel safe with? And it should start with your family. Many times it doesn't, but it should. But if it doesn't, then how are you going to feel safe within yourself? So having the gratitude, being intentional, manifesting certain things within your mindset, having great cognitive affirmations, things that you want to say, mindfulness, how you eat, what you put in your body. A lot of people don't realize certain foods make you react a certain way. You should have a lot of live food in your system. Okay, so all those things matter. Hopefully that's helpful, sister.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Charmaine.
And let me just say one more thing. Ancestors are very important. So, connecting with your ancestors, you can actually heal them even with calling out their name, elevating their spirits. I know many people have different, ideology, but we are, as we stated, we are a people of the Eastern world. So we need to pay attention to some of those traditions and what that may look like.
Okay.
Any more questions?
I think you answered what would have been my question in relation to the healing, and that it's not just, I don't know if I'm using the right word, one dimensional. It's not just that I heal so that I can heal my children and my grand, but when I heal, I'm reaching back. It's almost like pruning a tree. When you prune that one part of the tree, once you realize that infection is there, once you prune that, the tree itself gets healthier, right? So it goes down to the roots and it goes out. So healing me is the start of the process of healing my family and healing the community.
Right.
I don't know if I have the right words to explain it, but I think that that's what you were saying in terms of reaching back and even healing the ancestors.
Absolutely.
And that it's just a continuous process, that it's not just one dimensional in terms of healing, because we're all connected.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we have to remember, sometimes we are the altar and not the sacrifice. We have to take care of ourselves to heal. Our role is to heal ourselves and those behind and in front of us. We're just not living for ourselves. You have to change our perspective.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Comments? Observations? I mean, we're at 8:45. We might as well push for 15 more minutes. Because,
Monda.
I mean, we had our first snow today on the East Coast. You ain't going nowhere. Any shows coming on that? I don't know. They can't be as important. So, Rhonda, what have you put in the chat? Zai. Oh, Zai, did you want to talk about the spiritualism piece of it?
Who did you say?
Oh, Zai. Okay, she's not speaking up. I'm gonna call somebody.
Oh, I think she did speak about her ancestral altar, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Monda, I'll share just one thing but like with what Dr. Sonya was saying, that how we have to realize where we come from and our traditions. And because when I've shared, the poem, We Speak Their Names, right? You know, that the poem. When I've shared that, like even at a reunion, my extremely Christian Southern relatives are like, you call out the names of the ancestors. You acknowledge the names as you're going through. You acknowledge the names of all those that have gone before us. And I tell you that we get a lot of feedback and a lot of resistance because they're like, what are you doing? That's who are you praying to? What names are you
Yeah.
speaking? So I think that when we get out of that, even as Christian believers, when we step away just from and acknowledge the traditions that we come from, we grow. So I just wanted to share that.
I agree.
And you know what was interesting, Miss George, is even in the Christian faith and in the belief, um, that ancestor veneration is there, and it's done all the time, and we don't acknowledge it for exactly what it is. One, just because we simply don't know, right? So that's the first thing. um but the fact that we have pictures of all of our ancestors on the wall with with the Bible right there, that's ancestor veneration,
Mm.
right? So it may look different than what it does in this virtual system, but it's the same thing. And
Mm.
so, if the more we can connect and educate our community about some of those traditions, that is almost like, where do you think that came from? It came from somewhere, right? And our ancestors brought that tradition here and kept it alive, but they kept it alive in the way that they could keep it. Um, um, Given all of the being enslaved, so to speak, right? That they had to hide and do the things that they needed to do in order to survive, right? But those traditions still got passed down. They look different, um, but they're very much the same.
Thank you. I'm stealing that example. Thank you. The next time we have a family gathering, I will steal that, because just to point out, because I never thought about it. It is in the Bible. It's in the, I mean, you can sit there for an hour when they talk about son of so and so, son of so and so, mother of so and so, and they start from the year 2000 and go all the way back to BC, of all the naming the generations when they're talking about who people are. So I think I just may steal that. Thank you.
And let me clarify, Miss George, but that's great too. What I would
Mhm.
say is, just even when you
Oh,
have,
I got that part
yeah,
too.
okay, yeah,
I
all
got
right,
that part. I totally got that part too. And I will bring it out. Only, like you said, in terms of educating, just in terms of educating, and sharing, because we've got a lot of healing to do for sure.
Yeah, and there's just something to be said about the remembering when we come on this earth to, despite all of the mess flying around, if at some point in all that mess we can find that remembering, and if part of it is, as Dr. Sonia said, understand who you are and whose you are. So some of you know me and know me as a filmmaker, storyteller, and know about my first film, Zoo Volker Show. And I'm going to share. Rhonda put it in the chat, but I saw this picture and from a human last known human zoo, which was in Brussels, Belgium, in 1958. And I didn't know what a human zoo was. I never heard of it, and it kind of I had a knee jerk reaction to it, and I felt as if I wanted to tell a story from this little girl's point of view. Who is she? What was it like? Is this, all these questions running through my head? But I did a lot of research, and I was getting more and more agitated because there were two photographers in Brussels at that World's Fair in 1958. The theme of it was a new world view, a new humanism, which made me even angrier because I couldn't understand how there could be an exhibit in a human zoo with Africans being touted as scavengers. Um, I mean savages, excuse me. Uh, it didn't reconcile for me. It also didn't reconcile. I'm like, okay, it's 1958, so you can't tell me that Europeans don't know what Africans look like. So I did a deep dive, and I told this film from the little girl's perspective. But with all the research that I did, I was never able to find a name for her. The photographers named everything. Oh, this is that, and this is such and such, but they didn't name this little girl. and it upset me so. And so I said, well, if I can't find out her name, at least perhaps I can share what I think her journey might be. So theoretically, she could still be alive today. But if you have an opportunity, it's on YouTube. Feel free to watch Zoo Völkershow. Völkershow is German for human zoo, and just let me know what you think. Thanks. Okay. So, anything else before we wrap up for the evening? We started heavy. We're ending light. Okay. Well, Mrs. Margaret Morrison, she is mama, auntie, soror, friend. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I look forward to speaking with you more and learning more about your journey. And Dr. Sonya, this incredible. thank, thank you. I mean, this is just the beginning. We can never get too old to learn, right? And to share and our knowledge with others and to uplift, because this is what the Healing Chronicles are all about. So thank you to all of you. And for those new people that I've just met, thank you. It's been wonderful. Andre, we are going to have a Healing Chronicles about the color thing. I don't know any of us who have not experienced it. And we're going to talk about why black babies are still picking the white dolls. That's important, right? So we'll let you know when that is. And just look forward to continuing to communicate and to build with you all as community. If there are any particular topics that you want to talk about, let me know. And we'll see what we can do about putting a discussion together. So thank you.
Quick question, Monda.
Yes.
I went to that link and it said it's not available for
Which
the zoo
link?
short.
Oh,
Really?
hold on.
Rhonda?
I can copy and paste it again.
Okay. I mean, you can.
I think in my chat it's harder to copy and paste and repost for some reason.
Yeah, you can just Google Zoo Broker Show on YouTube.
Hold on.
And
Type it in.
one of my author buddies and dear friends is on the line as well, Rochelle Sultan. She's done a lot of research around intergenerational DNA, and she's going to have a book coming out in 2020 next year, actually, called Bridges. And as opposed to more like the clinical studies, it is based on her personal experiences and her journey, which is very it's a very good story, but there's pain, but there's the bridge from the pain to the healing. So it's very compelling, and I would encourage you to look out for that as well. I'll put it in the chat. Rhonda. Okay, Zoo Booker Show. Okay, Dr. Sonya, do you have any closing words?
Just remember, people, that we can heal. We need to come together. Remember our traditional practices. Pray, uplift each other, give words of affirmation, gratitude. Know that you can heal. There are people out here that will assist you. Believe in it, acknowledge it, accept it. It's time for all of us to heal. Heal ourselves, we can heal our community and our future.
And
Thank you for having me.
How can people get in contact with you?
Oh yeah, that's important.
Yes.
My information in the chat, my website.
Yes, Jean. All right.
Oh, thank you, Jean. I appreciate you coming in and all the people that I invited to this call. Thank you so much.
And we have been recording, so it will be available on YouTube shortly.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and happy holidays to you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
friend.
Same to you. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Margaret. That was fun. Okay.
Was interesting. Amazing.
Yeah, and I will I'll also have the chat here, Dr. Sonia, so I'll make sure that I send that to you as well so you can see the comments. Sometimes it's hard to kind of follow when you're presenting to see what everyone's saying, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I wasn't able to see it, but I think it went well.
Leaving is such pain. It's painful, isn't it? Look at that. Still here. Still
I don't
enjoying
want
each
to miss a
other.
nugget. Like, I don't want to miss another nugget. Which lets me know that this is needed. So I'm grateful that this community came together for this.
Me too. Good night, everybody.
Yes, good
Yeah.
night.
Bless.
Be well, everyone.
Good
Thank-
night. We hope to see you January 27th.
Oh yeah.
Yes, yes.
All right. Let me stop recording.
Sorry, we still on. I was connected with some people in the private chat. That's why we still here.
Ah,
That's
you
okay.
know what, Charmaine? Go ahead on. You use us as a vessel template.